Welcome to today's Qualify at the Intersection. Before we start, I want to talk about why I do what I do real quick. You see this picture behind me? It's a picture of me interviewing Harry Belafonte, the great civil rights icon. And that's why, because he worked hard on my behalf and it's my job to do the same. So I told you that this week I'm going to be focusing on practical solutions, what we can do, what steps we can take to improve our lives, our workplaces. So today we're going to look at a chapter from my book. My book is Qualified: How Competency Checking and Race Collide at Work. And the purpose of this is to really help you understand how you can use this book in real life. So there's a chapter in there called Chapter 4, which actually is called The Myth of Qualifications, because we have a lot of myths when it comes to what we think of around qualifications. And the one we're going to talk about is evaluations, because the way we measure performance is broken. And the myth at the core of that brokenness is something we've been told for decades, that the workplace is a meritocracy, that only the most qualified people get ahead, and that hard work and credentials, that's all that matters. We all know that's not true. Right? There are friends and family. There's history that tells us that. At Harvard, for years, they had something called the gentleman's C. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the president, and the head of the Senate, Lathrop Brown, they were classmates, and they averaged C's and D's, right, before and in Harvard. And it's not great inflation. Trust me. They just didn't think they had to do much. Yet both of them rose to the highest levels of politics and influence. And what were their qualifications? Well, their qualifications were their advantage, right? Their advantage was their qualifications. And a lot of times when people talk about merit today, I think they're talking about that system, right? Bias was built into tests. Take the SAT, which has a specious history you can read about in the book, but oarsman is to regatta as runner is to marathon. That was the question at the SAT. That didn't really measure your intelligence. If you didn't know that, it wasn't because you were stupid and you weren't intelligent, you weren't going to do well. It just meant you weren't from a class where people went boating and you knew what a regatta was. That's not intelligence. It measured belonging. So think about that bias across every test, every licensing exam, credential system, and you start to see how qualifications are actually frequently something used to protect what I call accidental advantage. So it feels like to me that same logic is still shaping evaluations inside our workplaces today. Now, Black professionals are frequently the canaries in the coal mine. You see them with multiple graduate degrees remaining stuck in mid-tier roles while less qualified white peers advance. You have leaders like Wells Fargo's CEO who publicly proclaimed there weren't enough Black candidates in all the United States for his executive team. That's the myth of qualifications, and it lives on. And the consequences are very personal. For my book, I interviewed Dr. Alicia Moreland Capua, Dr. AMC, and she put it plainly. She said, quote, residency training means that you should be able to make mistakes, right? Because that's how, as a doctor, you learn and grow. Well, imagine a world where you're in training and you're not allowed to make a mistake. That is what many Black people find in the workplace. That's a reality for too many Black professionals. And when systems are built this way, they don't actually just harm people of color. They weaken workplaces for everyone. So let's talk about something I really dislike, which is, I call it the drive-by evaluation. That's the 360 review. So why do I call it a drive-by evaluation? I call it that because it allows people frequently with little or no insight into somebody's work to give vague and often biased critiques that can stall careers. If I don't like you, I can't wait to get that 360 evaluation so I can say whatever. I coached a Black leader who received a review that said simply they weren't leading, but there was no explanation of no context. Now, that leader had been trying to be more collaborative because as a Black leader, he knew he couldn't be, definitive. And that was his intention, but it didn't line up with perception. And the feedback undermines credibility without giving anything real to work on. Another client I had is an Asian American professional who was told that they were too focused on their goals. Now, I thought that one was so interesting because in the person's industry, being focused and business driven were kind of what you were supposed to do. They should be strengths, and they were getting good results. The critique didn't measure performance. It just measured how somebody felt about somebody. That's competency checking in evaluations. And what we see is that the bar shifts There's going to be different for different people. The rules move and bias gets in there in the feedback. So, what can we do to fix this? Well, I tell you what, it doesn't require a formal diversity program. It requires intentionality, slowing down, auditing your instruments, and here are some practical ways to rebuild your evaluations so they actually measure performance. Number one, audit your instruments. Slow down. Examine the hiring and advancement tools you use, right? Do they actually measure job relevant skills? Or are there cultural assumptions in there, like oarsman is to regatta, right? If the vendors you work with can't explain this and help you understand how this is applicable to a broad range of people, demand they do better. Number two, rethink personality tests, DISC, Enneagram. None of that predicts job performance, and they actually stereotype people and oversimplify what is more nuanced, right? And that is how we communicate across our real differences. Those are the sources of miscommunication we have. Rebuild your evaluations. Stop the drive-bys. Use collaborative evaluations that are role-specific and goal-specific. Give regular, real-time feedback instead of these vague annual reviews. Ask only people with direct knowledge of someone to evaluate them, but make sure you replace open-ended opinions with concrete example-based feedback, right? And number four, evaluate the evaluators. Rotate and train your evaluators to recognize their own assumptions and create accountability by making sure that people understand how they can interrupt the things that they may be assuming in those evaluations, right? And number five, whatever you're doing, base it on skills. Define the actual skills required for the role. Let's say it's a job interview. Test for them directly. Keep frameworks updated as jobs evolve, but don't make a job so complicated only 10 people can apply for it. When you base hiring and promotion on skills, you prevent wasted talent and you open the opportunities for growth, right? And this matters because these changes, they aren't extra. They're not, they don't have to exist in a diversity, equity, inclusion program. They should be seen as about continuous improvement and building better workplaces, right? More accurate evaluations, clearer growth paths, stronger organizations, and things you can measure. So you can look back and say, well, Sherry's been here 10 years, Why isn't she got promoted yet, right? We move from vague impressions to intentional systems. This has nothing to do with lowering standards. In fact, it was never about that. That's just a smokescreen. It's about creating honest ones. It's about dismantling this old time myth of qualifications. And I know that's something that we can do step by step. The book, Qualified at the Intersection, can help you with this. Chapter 4, again, goes into greater detail on how we dismantle the myth of qualifications. So tomorrow, we're going to tackle another real area with real solutions. Yes, I know the world is burning down. I know every day there is something that we need to react to. And I will react to some of those things coming up soon, but we do also need to focus on what we can do. So we'll see you tomorrow.